Hello out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. Really exciting time to join GamecockScoop.com Premium if you haven't. Baseball is going down the stretch here. Lots of recruiting news, some portal news. We'll touch on a little bit here, but obviously we want all the insight, all the quotes, all that fun stuff. GamecockScoop.com. You can join that for less than $100 a year. Go ahead and get in early and then ride it through football season, which is when it's the most active anyway. Let's talk a little bit of recruiting right here at the top. So we're going to talk a little bit about a commit, Dante Reno, who is the 2024 quarterback commit. He recently competed in the Under Armour camp up in, I believe it was in New Jersey, for all the Northeastern kids. Rivals had some people there. We posted some videos on Saturday, got some feedback on all that. He actually ended up winning the camp MVP for quarterback, maybe for offense. I don't remember the specific on that, but he got an MVP award. He also got an Under Armour game invite, which is a pretty big deal. So I think if you read our last article where we interviewed Reno, it was probably like 2 weeks ago on GamecockScoop.com, you can still go back and look at that. He mentioned that he was going to enroll early in January. Now that's still the case, but he's going to participate in the Under Armour game and then enroll after that. So only a little quick update there on that. But obviously, I mean, good news that your quarterback commitment is playing on that big time stage there. We'll get to kind of go up against some of the best in the country before he arrives on campus and finds himself in the midst of the quarterback battle, most likely, because as we've said, we kind of expect Spencer Rattler, pretty much everyone expects Spencer Rattler to move on after this season, and then it's going to be, Doty, Sellers, Bailey, Reno. On that note, we do have a couple transfer portal updates. I believe all these dropped after the last podcast.
Didn't one of them drop during? Didn't we get hit with that in the middle of one last week?
I think you're right. I think Braden Davis did. So yeah. Braden Davis, quarterback, entered the portal. I think we talked a little bit about Anthony Rose, who officially is transferring. We weren't sure if there was much of a path for him to get back after being suspended for that arrest soon after the season or whatever. But either way, he's not going to try to get back. If there was a path, he's transferring. We also had Demetrius Watson, who is a reserve defensive lineman, and Colin Heinrich, who is a reserve offensive lineman. None of those guys were really expected to make much of an impact. I mean, maybe Rose, but obviously we already knew that ship had sailed a while back. But yeah, none of the other ones were really going to be depended on too heavily this year. And so they're off to seek greener pastures, and good luck to them all.
Pretty much, I mean, portal-wise for the spring window, they didn't really have any attrition. Now, that comes along with a lot of it in the winter. A lot of guys out, but they didn't really – there's no one they lost in the spring window where you would say, ooh, that's going to be a big loss. It's portal-wise at least. We're going to get to that in a second. But, yeah, it's probably, I'd say, a successful portal window there in terms of outgoing, but now we got to see what the ingoing looks like.
Yeah, and we have heard a couple of names. Perhaps the biggest name in terms of position of need is Jatius Gear. He's a former BHP up in the upstate high school athlete that went to Syracuse. He was a 3-star defensive end coming out of high school. Pretty good, potential and size, so, Power 5 transfer, and obviously at a position of need. So that's one that I think we should feel pretty good about at the moment. We'll keep you in the loop on that at GamecockScoop.com. But Jatius Gear is a good name to keep in mind. There's a couple others that we've heard a little bit on. There was even an offensive lineman out of Mercer on campus yesterday, I believe.
Yes.
And I imagine if South Carolina decided to pull the trigger on that would be a shoe-in. And I do think that they'll probably look for some sort of Band-Aid at offensive line, I believe is how you described it.
Because unfortunately,
yesterday, Shane Beamer introduced the new defensive line coach, which we'll get to in just a second. But also he answered a couple questions, and one of those questions was concerning offensive lineman
Jalen Nichols.
There it is.
We talked about it. I guess it would have been 2 episodes ago now when we recapped the spring game. He went down on the second drive of the spring game. I'm not a doctor. From where I sat, it looked pretty terrible. It looked like kind of an ACL. It was definitely knee related. His parents were on the sideline with him later. He obviously didn't come back in the spring game. And Shane Beamer said yesterday he will be out for at least the start of the season. He didn't say the whole year, although he does tend to kind of undersell injuries. We've seen that in the past. So I wouldn't bank on him being back. But at minimum, South Carolina has lost its projected starting left tackle for the start of the year with a front-loaded schedule, too. I mean, you got North Carolina week 1, Georgia week 3, Tennessee week 5. That's a big loss. There's just no way around it.
Yeah, even if he does somehow come back later in the season, you're missing him for the brunt of your most difficult games. So that's going to be tough. We kind of talked about who might fill in there a little bit after the spring game, but projecting Ja'Kai Moore probably to slide in there. Maybe Marky Anderson, but that's a really big ask for a true freshman who I do project one day should be the starting left tackle there, but that's a lot right out of the gates. You obviously brought on Sidney Fugar, who big body. I would also kind of describe as a Band-Aid, though. He's
none of them are Jalen Nichols, who I don't know. Is it fair to say Jalen Nichols was the best pass blocker on this roster at any line position? I think so. Yeah,
I mean, certainly if you combine the talent with the experience, for sure. So that's gonna be tough. Like I said, it won't surprise me if they bring in another Band-Aid situation just for depth. But it's going to be tough to find someone of that caliber in the portal this late. I wouldn't project that. So that's going to be an area of concern. They're going to have to figure out how to get some guys up to speed very quickly, and also probably adjust the game plan a little bit to cover up some of that deficiency as well. You're probably not going to want to take too many 5-7 step straight drops against a Georgia D line or anything with what you got at left tackle.
You're going to need a more mobile Spencer Rattler too. We saw some of that towards the end of last season. I feel like we had a conversation early last year that he wasn't running enough, he wasn't using his legs enough, but you're going to need him to step up in the pocket and make quicker decisions. Get outside, and you're probably going to need that anyway. But not having your starting left tackle just underscores that even more. That you're going to need Spencer Rattler to be a dual threat guy this year.
Yeah, and again, if we're talking scheme, I imagine you're going to try to roll away from that left tackle,
the left side,
as much as you can. Obviously, not so much that becomes predictable, but I imagine you're going to have to build that in some. So, and you brought in Mario Anderson, who's a pretty big-bodied running back.
That's true.
Let's hope that he can block out of the backfield.
Some chip blocks a little bit, yeah. That's because you're probably not counting on a lot of that from no disrespect. Juju McDowell at his size. I don't know if it's fair to ask Kerryon Jordan to do that, even though Beamer said he's had some good reps at that in the spring. Again, new position. That's it. That's the other kind of angle, I guess, of not having your full complement of running backs is a lot of times you rely on them in pass protection too. I wonder if you're going to see more tight end sets with a tight end off left tackle. I don't know if that's a Nick Elksnis kind of job, maybe. You probably want Trey Knox going out to catch passes more, but I don't know. Josh Simon, is that going to become something for him, kind of pass protection? There's a lot of options here. This is where the rebuilt tight end room helps, but I think you might see more 12 personnel than you might have otherwise.
Yeah, I was about to bring that up, and I think you have one of the better tight end groups in the country, so that could help cover up some of that deficiency. But you're definitely gonna have to get a little creative here. You would have liked to have Nichols there to play with, but yeah. So we got the official word on that. Another couple of things that have happened since we last talked is D-line coach Jimmy Lindsey took a job at LSU. I believe Beamer yesterday said that what is the LSU coach's name? Brian
Kelly. You got
Kelly. Man, my brain. I don't know what's going on today. Brian Kelly reached out a couple weeks ago about that, which allowed Beamer to go ahead and start kind of thinking about who would be next. And yesterday, officially, although we got the word a little earlier than yesterday on that, Travian Robertson's coming back home, former South Carolina edge rusher, linebacker, little bit of do everything.
Did you see the numbers for Lindsey, by the way?
No.
LSU bumped his salary from $475 here to $750, and also paid $300,000 for him to get out of the South Carolina contract.
Well, that's
pretty hard to turn down.
But honestly, I think a good move by Beamer to bring in Robertson,
Yes.
who's definitely a rising star as a coach, and obviously just making the South Carolina connection. We've heard good things about him as a recruiter, and who better to be recruiting to South Carolina than someone
that's the thing Beamer mentioned yesterday. Yeah.
Any other takeaways from that press conference yesterday? And then I know that you also got an inside look at what was it, his former coach? I actually didn't read that article.
Yeah, so I'll get to that in a sec. First thing, y'all know this, you're South Carolina people. He's extremely South Carolina. Obviously played here under Spurrier. He was part of that 2010 SEC East Championship team. He clearly loves South Carolina. I didn't know this, but his wife was an SEC champion in track here at South Carolina. He got married on campus. His kids are here. Like, this is, people like say, oh, this is where I want to be. This is exactly where Travian Robertson wants to be. And that was just dripping out of him the whole time. And at Beamer too, because Beamer coached him. He was a special teams coordinator and Robertson was a player here. So maybe not directly. He wasn't like his D-line coach, but Travian Robertson and Shane Beamer have a relationship going back over a decade now. Beamer said he made one phone call, which I believe. I mean, that was the choice. And don't forget also, he was at Tulane, who went 12-2 last year with a very good defensive line, top 10 in the country. Like, that's not just a welcome home hire. That's a guy who's coached well. He coached with Jordan Strawn at Georgia State before Tulane. Beamer said he called Strawn before he made the hire. There's a lot of pieces that make sense here about this.
No, yeah. And I mean, he's got a lot of good pieces to work with as well. And something that I think fans immediately sort of responded to when Lindsey left was, oh, he's a really good recruiter, which is true. He's a good recruiter. There's a reason LSU wanted him, all that sort of thing. But also, I think that this is something that you're going to have to deal with as South Carolina continues to build. Every program that has success has to deal with this, is other schools wanting your guy and being willing to pay those guys. And I really don't think that this is a scenario where South Carolina is underpaying their assistants or anything. I think I think that Beamer's really emphasized trying to make sure that his assistants get paid as they continue to ramp up. But it's hard to compete with $300,000.
I don't know if $750,000 would make him the highest paid D-line coach in the country. I think it would have to put him in the top few. Yeah, and then you add in the $300K they gave him to get out of South Carolina, and in some ways that's over $1 million for a position coach, which there's no way South Carolina is going to compete with that. I mean, that's and then the other thing I did, he mentioned that he got his coaching career started with a meeting with former South Carolina kicker. Some of y'all might remember the name Mark Fleetwood from the early 80s. He was a kicker at South Carolina, became a high school coach in Georgia, and through a whole, I guess, kind of web of Gamecocks, for lack of a better term, it's all in the story. It's on GamecockScoop.com. He got him a meeting with Mark Fleetwood in 2015 when Robertson was done with the NFL. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do next, and Mark Fleetwood said, "Hey, you'd be a pretty good coach." He spent some time on the high school field in Georgia. He liked it. Got a job as a GA at Georgia State. Went to a D2 school. Went back to Georgia State. Went to Tulane, and now he's in South Carolina. So I talked to that high school coach and former Gamecock last night. Luckily, a guy actually from my neck of the woods, so I had the number already, and that was a pretty easy story. But it's an interesting look for sure, and just another sign that he is, like I said, exactly where he wanted to be this whole time.
Yeah, and as I was saying before too, I think he's got a really good group to work with. Nice mix of veteran talent like Boogie Huntley, TJ Sanders, but also some newcomers, Xavier McLeod, who I think flashed a little bit in the spring game already. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how that shakes out. They're in the recruiting game already with several 2024 and 2025 defensive linemen, including Amari Adams, who's one of the top defensive linemen in the 2025 class. Another name that's escaping me right now that's like top 3 or 4 defensive linemen in the 2025 class. So his immediate job is going to be make contact with those guys, reestablish that relationship, and sort of hit the ground running, which I did see he was just recruiting in Atlanta today and made his first offer. I don't have that name right in front of me, but
he was back out there today.
So,
and I think it's also interesting. Go ahead. No, it's interesting too that you've got an outside linebacker / edge coach here too. So you've got kind of 2 D-line coaches. He mentioned yesterday that he talked to Sterling Lucas. He's got a good relationship with Sterling Lucas, but that's also a dynamic at play here that he's really coaching defensive tackles, even though his job title says defensive line. But you've got 2 guys there with some D-line expertise when you factor in Lucas.
Yeah, and that name I was looking at, Christian Garrett. So guy out of Atlanta that he offered this morning. I actually will have to look into that person a little bit more. That's not a name I knew before, but so he hit the ground running immediately, and I think it's a good move. It's pretty much as good as you can ask for
at this stage too. You're hiring a coach in May is not common at all.
No, exactly. We do have a couple men's basketball notes before we get into our in-season sport in baseball. So South Carolina landed who I think is their biggest portal target from this period in BJ Mack. That was last Thursday, I believe. That's a Wofford forward center, kind of tweener. But scored at a crazy clip at Wofford this past year, 16.1 points per game, several rebounds per game. Really fits almost perfectly into what I think Lamont Paris wants out of his bigs on the inside, in the sense that he can score by just sort of like banging it in there, but also he's got a little bit of touch, a little bit of finesse to his game. And I think probably projects immediately as someone that's going to start. And I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about what that starting 5 or 6 or 7 look like a little bit going into next year. So Michi Johnson, probably going to run the point. You have Jacoby Wright, who's going to factor in there, but I don't know if he is in the starting 5.
I think he might be your starting 2 guard, maybe. Well, who did you have in mind for that spot?
Well, so that's actually kind of a loaded spot right now, I think. So you got Talon Cooper. Mm-hmm. You have Zach Davis, who I think flashed and showed some good things as a freshman. And then you have Agreement Deba coming back, who could play some forward, could play some guard. We'll kind of see how that shakes out. So that's really the biggest question mark for me. But I think all 4 of those guys are going to factor in and get plenty of minutes.
Yeah, I kind of think it's Jacoby just with the experience in the system and also how well he played last year down the stretch. But you're right. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if any of those 4 got the nod.
And then we also got Miles Stute out of Vanderbilt, who projects as either small forward, power forward. I think he'll get plenty of minutes as well. You got Stephen Clark, who's kind of the Hayden Brown replacement, not quite as physical as Hayden Brown, but comes from the Citadel, kind of a multiple variable scorer as well. I think he'll factor in. And then you still have Josh Gray and BJ Mack, as we're saying too. So
I kind of think that's your 4-5 starting. Gray at center and BJ Mack at the 4. Am I crazy, or is that kind of what I think it looks like in the front court?
That sounds right to me, but I also do think Stute and Clark both factor in for some pretty heavy minutes. So overall, and this is something that we talked about a couple weeks ago, you don't have a Gigi Jackson on this squad. But I do think you're much deeper and you have a lot more options.
That's the big thing to me. You've got Lamont Paris has options. He's got in-game adjustments. If you want to go big, you can put kind of Mac out there with Gray. You know, you can kind of go big lineup with Clark in there at the 3. If you need to go small, you need to shoot. All right, we'll shoot the 3-point shooter. Cooper's a 3-point shooter. You can run a 4-guard lineup. We did that some last year with Chico, Michi, Jacoby. I'm blanking the other, but he did that a little bit last year too. If you wanted to, I don't know, run a Michi Johnson, Talon Cooper, Miles, Stu, Jacoby lineup when you're down 8 with 3 minutes to go and need some threes, you can do that. Like, he's got puzzle pieces to mix and match here, which just wasn't the case last year.
No, and I think you look at that that roster and you have to feel a little bit more optimistic about them at least making noise in the SEC next year. I'm not saying that they should be expected to be a tournament team or anything necessarily. But I think you probably can project more in the middle grouping, which is a wide range between, I don't know, like 7 to 14, 7 to 12 or whatever. And if you finish in the upper part of that grouping, maybe you're a bubble team.
I'd be interested to see, and we're still 3-ish months away from this, but interested to see how they schedule non-conference. Because last year that was just, I don't want to say a write-off, but you knew what it was. I think you can tell a lot about teams by how aggressively they schedule, what they want their team to do, what they think they can handle. I'm interested to see who Lamont brings to play here, if he's trying to get into any. I know they're already in one showcase event in Charlotte. I think it's like the first Friday of the season or something, but kind of who they schedule, where they think this roster is right now, and kind of start. If you're trying to build out a bubble team and you need probably 9 or 10 SEC wins and 8 or 9 non-conference wins, kind of how they go about doing that.
Yeah, definitely. So I do think at least the excitement heading into next basketball season will be a little elevated compared to what it was this past season. As people who get paid to talk about this sort of thing, it wasn't the most fun season that we've experienced over the past year. But also I do think it got more fun, and I think Paris kind of at least proved his basketball strategic chops, including some wins that probably they were definitely out talented but they were able to pull it off. And so I'm interested to see what he can do with a more balanced roster.
They were a better team at the end of last year than the start of last year, I think, without question. And then he's not going to play in 2023-24 season, but you've got a piece of recruiting news today too.
Right. So on top of BJ Mack joining, we also got news that the final roster spot is being filled. So I can't remember if we said on the podcast or not. We definitely put it on GamecockScoop.com. The 2 Finnish players, there was a forward and a guard, Morris Ugasuk, and I can't remember the forward's name right off the top of my head. They were both originally 2024 guys, and we got word today that Morris Ugasuk is going to, I hope I'm saying his last name right, but he's going to reclassify for 2023 and go ahead and enroll. So that's that last roster piece. Don't know how much he'll factor in as a freshman. You were saying that you've heard more that this is just to get him acclimated and get a year under his belt in the system sort of thing coming from Finland. So we have our roster fully set for next year unless something weird happens.
Yeah, and then we haven't mentioned them yet, but we're talking about next year. So they're not going to start, but you've got Arden Conyers and Colin Rory Boyles into the rotation at some point next year too.
Which actually it wouldn't surprise me if Colin Murray Boyles contributes somewhat. He's finished really, really strong as in his high school career and really shot up some rankings there. I think that was a almost diamond in a rough sort of player that they found there. So it'll be interesting to see there. But overall, I think you have to feel pretty good about the roster, at least compared to where we were a year ago.
Not even a question.
Baseball wise, so I think we blew too much smoke last week. We were talking about how it was basically inevitable that they were going to be a top 8 seed, and then they came out. We talked about how they had only lost 1 game at home. how the rest of the schedule looked good, including a pretty easy series against Auburn, and then pretty quickly that did not work out for them. So they went 1-2 this past weekend against Auburn at home. Lost the first 2 games of the series. Needed some late game heroics from an unlikely source and Will Tippett, who hit his first career home run to sort of lift that rally. But yeah, ultimately did get that Sunday game. Baseball America and D1 baseball and all the baseball polls didn't really punish South Carolina very much. They're still sitting right there at 3 and 4 in most of the polls. And we were kind of talking before we got on here that we think a lot of that has to do with the injuries and being kind of forgiving of those injuries. Can you kind of give us a rundown of what those injuries look like? What some of the timelines you kind of are thinking are on some of them are? And we'll get hopefully more updates tonight after the Winthrop game. But
all right. Here's kind of where I'm at with baseball right now. It's this team just needs to get healthy before the postseason. Yes, you very much want a top 8 seed. I still think there's a way they can do that for sure. You go 4-5, 5-4 these last 9 SEC games. But you've got Talmadge LeCroy, your regular third baseman, who pulled his hamstring 2 weeks ago. Not pulled, but he had a hamstring injury 2 weeks ago. He's not back yet. He took a pinch hit appearance on Saturday, but he grounded out to short and couldn't run. I don't know what to expect there. I think he's close, but maybe not this weekend, next weekend. Braylon Wimmer, a key piece, obviously, your senior leader, your shortstop, the guy who's been hitting second most of the year, also a hamstring problem. Kingston said that his timeline would be about the same as LeCroy's, which means you're starting a 2 to 3 week clock. He got hurt Friday. So that's really close to the end of the regular season with 3 weeks left. So you're talking about maybe Hoover for Wimmer or that last series, but got to see there. Will McGillis, it's been kind of quiet on that front for a while. They said 6 to 8 weeks when it happened. We're at 6 weeks now, or coming up on 6 weeks on Friday it will be. So you got to think close, but again, you're probably targeting Hoover or maybe the regional. And then the most concerning one that just keeps getting pushed and it doesn't sound good is Noah Hall. It doesn't sound like he's throwing yet. It's still that back injury. It keeps getting pushed a week. They announced Matthew Becker as a weekend starter last weekend instead of doing the to be announced thing, which is probably not a good sign on the Hall front. This is not me reporting anything. I think the staff is just planning on going the rest of the year, at least the regular season, without Noah Hall. I mean, you think about whatever a ramp up would be in the next 3 weeks for a pitcher, especially. There's just not that much runway left. It's not a good injury situation right now, and especially on the infield where you're missing 3 out of your 4 guys. They've kind of had to get creative. It's why Tippett's playing, Braswell's playing every day. They've had to move Cole Messina from catcher to third base because they're out of third baseman, which means French has to catch. It's kind of a mess right now, injury-wise, really, and hopefully we'll know more tonight from Kingston, but it's not good.
Which the good news, it does sound like almost all of those that you mentioned would be back around playoff time.
Yeah.
Which is, like you said, the most essential, although particularly in baseball, I do think like the gelling of a lineup and the momentum and all of that matters. So it will be interesting. You'd like to get at least, a couple of games in Hoover with that lineup before you play a regional. But yeah, it sounds like eventually they're going to get back. But this is like getting a little bit eerie to last season. I mean, obviously they're in a much better position, can afford to lose more games, all that sort of thing. But down the stretch, injuries were a big concern.
I think the one difference, though, is it was pitcher injuries last year they couldn't withstand. You don't like losing position players, but you still have arms that you can get through weekends with.
Yeah, which tonight, first-time starter.
It was going to be SQ. They actually made it Eli Jones. They got a correction. But I still think SQ pitches tonight just because they're going to be saving arms for the weekend.
Yeah, so I actually thought that when SQ was pitching, that kind of indicated that they were trying not to throw the Eli's as much tonight. But
maybe an inning for Eli Jones, inning 2. I mean, I don't know. It's going to be – he only threw, I think, an inning and a third on Sunday against Auburn. So we'll see. It's a weird time for a midweek. I think it's Wednesday instead of Tuesday this week because some kids still had finals Monday and Tuesday this week, I think is the reason. But you're at Kentucky this weekend. That's kind of, regardless of what happens tonight, that's the main thing. It's a road SEC series. It's a place they haven't played well historically. Kentucky's 11-10 right now in the league, so tracking for a regional, but maybe not a top, probably not going to host.
Winnable series for sure.
It's a winnable series for sure. And when you look at next week, when you're going on the road to Arkansas, especially, I don't want to say it's a must win because they're not going to miss the tournament if they lose 2 out of 3 this weekend. But if you're trying to like map out another 4 or 5 wins for a top 8 seed, you probably want to have 2 this weekend.
Yeah, agreed. And very doable, but also that was the case this past weekend as well. Anything in particular as we're like scouting Kentucky that South Carolina fans should be looking out for, thinking about?
They are a small ball team. That's kind of the main thing. They don't hit a lot of homers, but I believe they lead the conference in stolen bases. They lead the conference in sack bunts. They're going to try to do it 1 base at a time. It's not a power lineup at all, which could work either way for this team. We've seen them have some home run problems at times, but they're going to put pressure on the bases. They're going to force the catching to be on point this weekend, which if you don't have Messina behind the plate, that could be an issue. It's just a different kind of style to what a lot of the other teams in the SEC do, but they've also lost. Kentucky started hot. They started, I think, 8-1 in the league, and they've lost 4 straight series. Tough series. They were at Vanderbilt last week. They played at LSU, A&M. They played. So they're struggling right now, but they're still probably a regional team and definitely not someone you can take lightly. But it's going to be a different weekend for sure.
Yes.
Just kind of they're constructed.
Conflicting styles, right? Does South Carolina's
very conflicting
reliance on the home run and on power, is it able to score enough runs to kind of keep the inevitable few runs here and there that are going to come out of that small ball? Can you just outpace them pretty much?
That's kind of where I would look at it too. Yeah.
So it would be really interesting. I think you take 2 out of 3 here. You're feeling pretty good going down the stretch about still getting that top 8 seed. If you lose another series to what I would say is an inferior opponent, at least compared to the early part of the schedule, but like you said, a lot of injuries right now. I don't think it's like hit the panic button, because I think we're going to have to take a lot of the last 3 weeks with a grain of salt until they get healthy. But, it definitely is going to matter when it comes to seeding in the tournament and that path to Omaha, which I think most South Carolina fans are still kind of not expecting Omaha necessarily, but, I've looked at flights. I've kind of kept my eye on it just in case.
Here's a stat for you. Kentucky has 44 sack bunts this year. The next closest team in the SEC is Alabama with 16.
Wow.
Small ball. They're going to do it.
44?
And they lead
Is that what you said?
44. And they've got 70 stolen bases, which also leads the SEC. And they also lead the SEC in stolen base attempts. They have 92. They're going to bunt. They're going to steal bases. They're going to do it small.
And how do you feel like South Carolina matches up there? Because I haven't watched every single series. We've kind of split here and there. And obviously the home series you've been covering lately, so I haven't watched them consistently in a couple of weeks. Or at least not every game. But I do feel like that's been a little bit of a struggle, stolen bases in particular.
That worries me more with the catching
stuff.
Catching than anything, because if LeCroy can't play this weekend, which we'll hopefully know more tonight, that means Messina has to play third, which means you're down to a backup catcher.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the main thing there. It really goes back to the injuries, and you got to play good defense too. The ball's going to be on the ground a lot. You can't make errors, and we know that's been a struggle for this team at points too.
Yeah, that seemed cleaned up a little bit over the past.
It was better
weeks,
against Auburn, yeah.
Yeah, but definitely, you think back to the Vanderbilt series, that was single-handedly kind of probably what lost that series. So.
Where's your panic meter right now, 1 to 10? I'm at a 2, I think.
Yeah. I think if we were to get some conflicting injury news other than the ones you just ran down, then maybe you ratchet it up a little bit. If it seems like the majority of those guys aren't going to be back by the end of the year. But if everyone's back by the end of the year, maybe you take a couple of lumps on the way, but you've got a fully functioning team going into the playoffs. I think you can compete with anybody in the country.
That's kind of where I am too. This team just needs to be healthy. It's kind of what I wrote after the Auburn series. If you're mapping it, like I said, you don't want to look ahead. That's a brutal series next week at Arkansas. Arkansas is 11-1 at home in the league. They haven't lost a home series all season. You're probably I don't want to say probably, but there's a good chance you're staring at a series loss next weekend, just given the fact that nobody's won a series there all year in Arkansas, and that's another national seed contender. So it makes winning the series this weekend all the more important, just to kind of avoid what could be 3 straight series losses.
Yeah, and then you finish up the season
Tennessee
here, which is winnable, but they're pretty good too. So
they've woken up the last couple of weeks for sure.
Obviously, pretty much since they swept Vandy, that's kind of got going. So it'll be really interesting down the stretch. I don't think you see a full collapse, even with all of the injuries, and that's really all that you need right now is to just kind of keep the ship steady long enough for those guys to get back.
Yeah, for sure. And you could talk about different things for a national seed or whatever, and I'm sure we will over the next few weeks. But you need to get healthy. I think taking 2 this weekend would do a lot just to kind of buy more time for some of those guys and kind of make you feel better about things. But as long as you don't completely capitulate, you should at least host, be in that top 16. That's kind of where I am right now with it, with 3 weekends to go.
Do you see any stumbling blocks in the midweek? Winthrop's not terrible.
I think tonight could be weird just because it's a Wednesday instead of a Tuesday. They're going to be saving arms, so it's also on the road. But other than that, I think they got 2 other midweeks. It's North Florida and Charlotte. I guess Charlotte did beat him in one up there, but it's at home. I say probably not. I think the weirdest one would be tonight, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, which again won't be the end of the world if you lose one of those 3.
They've only lost 1 all year. They're 10-1 in midweeks right now.
Yeah, taking care of business. So, all right. Well, check us out on GamecockScoop.com this evening. Alan's going to be up in Rock Hill with some live updates from that one, and then we will split the series this weekend versus Kentucky or at Kentucky, and we'll be back here next week to talk about how it went, preview Arkansas, and talk about any other news in the meantime. So until next time, this has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and like and share and all that fun stuff. And we'll see you next time.